17-year-old Michelle Koski lived in Seattle, Washington in 1990. She was last seen leaving one of her friend's apartments on August 18th. A week later, a woman walking her dog near Echo Lake Road and Highway 522 in Snohomish came up on Michelle's body. The area is about 15 miles from where she was last seen. Michelle had been assaulted and suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The weapon used was determined to be pieces of concrete found nearby. Investigators collected DNA from the crime scene that belonged to the person that took her life. They also questioned criminals who have committed similar crimes in the area, but received no useful information. No witnesses came forward either, and the case soon went cold. Detectives Jim Scharf and David Heitzman reopened the case in 2005. A DNA profile of the suspect was then created. They entered it into the federal database, but this unfortunately did not yield any results. The detectives could, however, rule out suspects. Recently, they turned to Parabon Nanolabs for assistance in identifying the suspect and obtaining justice. Genealogists at Parabon had to first deconvolute the DNA sample because it contained the DNA from both suspect and victim. Dr. Janet Cady, who is the Senior Director of Bioinformatics Scientist at Parabon, said, "The crime scene in Michelle's case was particularly challenging. Without mixture deconvolution, the genetic genealogy matches would have included relatives of the victim and led investigators down a wrong path." Experts spent about 1 year building family trees and entering their findings into public genealogy websites such as Family Tree DNA and GED Match. Ultimately, this process led them to 2 brothers of the suspect. In 2022, after more testing, investigators announced that Robert Brooks is the man responsible for taking the life of Michelle Koski. Brooks was 22 years old at the time of the crime. He had just been released from prison when he took Michelle's life. Brooks was living with a relative only a few blocks from where she lived. It's not known if the two knew each other. Brooks passed away due to natural causes at the age of 48 in King County, Washington, on October 26, 2016. The estimated probability of selecting an unrelated individual at random from the U.S. population with a matching profile is 1 in 1.2 quadrillion, said the Sheriff's Office. Both the Sheriff's Office and Parabon Nanolabs praised Detective Scharf for his work. He was also involved in solving the cases of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Kuyenberg that I have covered before on the channel. Some of those who knew Michelle spoke at the news conference to share their relief that the case has finally been solved, including her friend Melissa Johnson, who had known her since she was 10 years old. "I often wonder what she would have been like had she still been alive, and how different my life would be as well," said Johnson. "I now pray that Michelle can finally rest in peace." 23-year-old Diane Cusick lived in Nassau County, New York in 1968. She worked as a dance teacher. Diane lived with her parents after becoming estranged from her husband. They had a daughter together named Darlene. Diane called her parents on the night of February 15, 1968, to tell them that she was going to the mall to purchase shoes. She never returned home. After a few hours, her parents got worried. Her father drove to the mall to see if he could find Diane. He found her body in the back seat of the family's 1961 Plymouth Valiant in the parking lot of the Valley Streams Green Acres Mall. Diane had been brutally beaten and assaulted in that car. She had been suffocated and had defensive wounds on her hands. Investigators released a description of a suspect they had: a white male in his late teens or early 20s with an average build, eyeglasses, and standing at least 5 foot 8 inches tall. Investigators said the man had been spotted at the movie theater in the mall shortly before Diane's body was discovered. Police also say the man might have been loitering in the area. At least 100 Nassau police officers searched the area and showed her photo to more than 2,000 people, asking them to shed light on her last hours. Investigators also collected DNA belonging to the suspect from the crime scene. Diane's estranged husband was questioned, but ruled out as a suspect because he was working his part-time job as a taxi driver when the crime took place. Years passed, the trail grew cold, and unfortunately the leads dried up. That all changed recently. In June of 2022, when investigators entered the suspect's DNA profile into public DNA databases, they found a match. The man whose DNA it was is Richard Cottingham. Many of you will have heard about him before. He is responsible for taking the lives of many women. Cottingham is already serving a life sentence in a New Jersey prison. He pleads not guilty, but is facing 25 years to life in prison if convicted. He is due back in court on August 22, 2022. Cottingham is in bad health at the moment and had to be arraigned while in a hospital bed, wearing a patient's gown and a face mask. Nassau County District Attorney Ann Donnelly said at a news conference that this may be the oldest case ever prosecuted based on DNA evidence. She also cautioned against being deceived by Cottingham's frail and sickly appearance. He is a violent predator, and no matter how he looks today in a hospital bed, he was not always a feeble man. He was a young 22-year-old when he took the life of Miss Cusick. He was strong, stronger than these women were, and he was violent. Diane's daughter, Darlene Altman, who was also at the press conference, had this to say: "I never thought I'd see this day. I had given up. But all these people got justice for me and my mother." Altman wore a necklace with a ballerina slipper charm that belonged to her mother. She was just 3 years old when Diane's life was taken. She also attended the arraignment. "It was overwhelming. He just had this dead stare. I thought he was looking at me. It was creepy." Detectives are investigating unsolved cases of women between 1967 and 1980, when Cottingham was active. Although Cottingham was primarily a Bergen County person and worked in Manhattan, we now have evidence that he was also here in Nassau County, and we're diligently reviewing unsolved cases, Donnelly also said. "57-year-old David Evans lived in Claremont, California in 1985. He was the vice president at a bank and a former school superintendent. David lived alone after he divorced his wife. On October 13, 1985, David's body was found inside his home. He had been beaten badly and suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The discovery was made by Claremont police officers during a possible burglary call at the residence. Evans had been a Duke-educated school administrator who worked as a teacher and school superintendent before shifting gears mid-life and entering the banking industry. He had been a pillar of the community who had been liked by everybody. Investigators at the time generated a few leads, but were unable to identify any viable suspects, and the case eventually went cold. Authorities took a new look at the case in 2006 after advances in forensic technology had been developed. Investigators found a small amount of DNA left behind at the crime scene and fingerprints belonging to the suspect. In 2020, investigators were able to confirm that the DNA and fingerprints were left at the crime scene belonged to Hillary Marcus Duplessis. Furthermore, investigators established that Duplessis had lived in the San Gabriel Valley area at the time of the crime was committed. This is not far from where David lived. They were also able to link him to David's vehicle that had been stolen after his life was taken and abandoned in Corvina, California about 2 hours later. On May 2, 2022, Duplessis was charged with ending the life of David Evans. He is currently incarcerated in a New York State prison serving an extensive sentence for a similar crime and will be eligible for parole in that case in 2033. Duplessis will soon be taken to Los Angeles where he will be arraigned on the new charges. Lieutenant Hugo Renaga said they think they know why Duplessis did what he did, but they don't want to reveal too much information before the case goes to trial. Renaga thanked the team of investigators, including those from the Sheriff's Office, Claremont Police Department, New York State Police, and the New York Department of Corrections, for bringing long-awaited justice and closure to the family of David Evans.